tonight. You're going to see the making of a debate tonight. You will see here on your screen 4 minutes and 41 seconds until we go live on the air. This is where the juggling probably comes in. Maybe we can perform a number.
Wisconsin Reporter proudly presents a debate between the Republican candidates for U.S. Senate in Wisconsin.
evening and welcome to the 2012 Wisconsin U.S. Senate debate of Republican candidates hosted by Wisconsin Reporter and the Republican Party of Waukesha County. I'm Matt Kittle, Bureau Chief of Wisconsin Reporter. Glad to have you here with us tonight. Wisconsin Reporter is a Madison-based State House news agency with a taxpayer focus. And we are proud to be here tonight from the Waukesha County Exposition Center in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a place where many pundits believe will help decide some critical elections coming up in 2012. We will be broadcasting tonight, live streaming, with the help of some news partners, the Washington Examiner, conservative blogging site Red State, and of course through our own WisconsinReporter.com site. You can tune in on any of those channels this evening, and we're very pleased tonight to have Wisconsin Eye taping this, and that will be replayed at a later date. We expect tonight an informative, lively, and energetic debate. And of course, it all begins with these gentlemen right here before you on this stage. They stand at these podiums tonight ready to talk about the issues and to think about and to examine what lies ahead. Of course, Jeff Fitzgerald, Speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly, joins us tonight. Eric Hovde, CEO of his family's Madison-based real estate development firm. Mark Neumann, Wisconsin's former 1st District Congressman. And Kip Smith, who is a physical therapist in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, entering the debate tonight. Now, you see before you 5 podiums. Tommy Thompson, former 4-term governor of Wisconsin and Health and Human Services Secretary under President George W. Bush, last week declined Wisconsin Reporter's many invitations to join us. He cited a prior engagement. But the candidates on this stage will tell you more about themselves and about where they stand on the issues coming up in just a moment. But before we do that, I would like to introduce you to our tremendous panelists tonight. 3 men who are very familiar with those in Wisconsin who are looking for news and commentary. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Steve Shamraz, who is a news anchor and investigative reporter for Milwaukee's WTMJ TV. He has received some of his industry's highest honors, including a National Headliner Award for investigative reporting, and has won 8 regional Edward R. Murrow Awards and 9 Mid-America Emmy Awards. Steve's work has been featured on the CBS Evening News, 60 Minutes, and Court TV. I'd like to introduce you tonight to Christian Schneider, who is a fellow at the Wisconsin Policy Research Institute and is a regular contributor to National Review Online. His columns have been featured in the New York Times, the New York Post, and City Journal magazine. Thank you for being here, Christian. We appreciate that. Charlie Sykes. U.S. Senator Ron Johnson has said, the reason I am a U.S. Senator is because Charlie Sykes read one of the senator's speeches. Well, he wasn't the senator at the time, was he? He read one of his speeches on his show. Charlie hosts the top-rated Midday with Charlie Sykes on 620 WTMJ in Milwaukee. He is editor of Wisconsin Interest magazine and is the author of several books, including Dumbing Down Our Kids, The Hollow Men, and A Nation of Moochers. Charlie, thank you for being here tonight. We expect a very lively debate because of the presence of these gentlemen tonight, and we look forward to their questions. We've talked about this before here, but let's explain quickly. The candidates tonight drew lots beforehand, and that determined where they will speak in terms of the opening statements. They'll have 60 seconds to make their opening statements. They'll have 60 seconds for their closing statements. and then we will have 30 seconds for rebuttal should the need arise. Let us get right to this debate because there's so much to talk about, and the candidate who drew number one tonight, who will open with his statements, is candidate Jeff Fitzgerald.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you. 15 months ago, I was sworn in as Speaker of the State Assembly, and I addressed the body and told them that it would be the most difficult session that they ever served in. And I have a simple message. The problems we faced here in Wisconsin are the same problems we face on a national level. Number one, we tried to get people back to work here in Wisconsin. How did we do that? We did it through regulatory reform, taxation reform, litigation reform. Number two, we wanted to take care of our fiscal mess, and we balanced a $3.6 billion deficit, and we did it without raising taxes. We face the same problems on a national level. We need to become more competitive in a global market. We need to start making products and putting people back to work because we know that government doesn't create jobs, that individuals create prosperity and wealth. Second, $15 trillion in debt. We are heading towards an economic cliff that is right around the corner. We have to stop spending more than we have coming in, and we have to do this through reforms as well. So I hope for a lively debate tonight, and I'll tell you, we're here to make the tough choices. That's what we've done in Wisconsin. That's what I want to do for you in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, sir. Next up tonight, Mark Neumann.
First, I'd like to thank all the folks that are involved in putting this on this evening. It's a very important event here, and we very much appreciate it. Most folks in the audience know me as a conservative, and I'd like to spend my opening talking about what exactly it means to be a conservative. I believe that faith, family, and country is the most important things in our life. I believe that the federal government should be run based on the principles found in the Constitution of the United States of America as given us by our founding fathers. I believe the federal budget should be balanced by cutting spending. I believe we should repeal Obamacare. I believe in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and that anything not specifically enumerated as a power of the federal government should be left to the states and to the people. I am pro-life and I am pro-family. I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. I believe in a strong defense for the United States of America, and I believe that the laws on immigration in this land should be enforced. And most important of all, I believe that as a conservative in the state of Wisconsin, that the most important job that we have to do this year is to see to it that Scott Walker and his entire team are reelected.
Thank you, sir. Next up is candidate Eric Hovde.
I'm here tonight, and to be honest with you, I really never thought I would be here tonight. I'm here because I am so profoundly concerned about the direction our country is heading. The last 20 years, career politicians, and this president in particular, has set us on a course that will lead to a financial collapse. I don't mean to be an alarmist. I don't like even saying those words. But the reality of it is we're on a course that many countries have tried before, and it always ends in a trail of tears. My guess is we may have 4 or 5 years before a collapse occurs of this government spending bubble. It will destroy our livelihoods. It will have vastly bigger ramifications than in 07, 08, and 09. And more importantly, it's going to have a devastating impact on our children and our grandchildren to achieve their hopes and dreams in our country. I spent the last 25 years in the private sector, building businesses, buying and turning around companies.
Sir, I'll caution you, we're at 60 seconds now.
I'm sorry. And I have a vision to get this country back on track, and I look forward to explaining my vision tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally tonight, Kip Smith.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kip Smith, and I'm a physical therapist from Rhinelander, and I'm not surprised you haven't heard of me. I've been in politics a grand total of 3 months, so I never thought I'd do this either. And I'm here for one thing and one thing only, to save this country. There are so many fronts that we need to fight. The main front is in the federal government. We need to rein it in, restore our constitutional freedoms, reestablish the Constitution, the entire Constitution. We need to rebuild our economy through free markets and less regulation, and giving tax breaks to our small businesses as well as our large corporations, getting our fiscal house in order, and cutting health care costs. Those are where I stand, and there are so many things that need to be changed in Washington, and we need strong conservatives, constitutional conservative citizens to be sent back to Washington. Someone who's going to stand for you regardless of re-election. Someone who's going to stand for you for the right reasons, not for power or status.
Sir, I'll caution you, you're at 60 seconds.
Thank you, sir. But for doing the right thing. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, sir. And speaking of reining it in tonight, let me do the rules of engagement, if you will, when it comes to the amount of time that the candidates will receive for making their comments and the rebuttals as well. Again, 60 seconds for their opening statements, 60 seconds for the closing statements. They will be asked a question by our panelists tonight. They will receive 60 seconds for an answer. If they run beyond the 60 seconds, you'll hear a tone. Everybody will hear a tone. That will tell you your 60, right there. There it is. Your 60 seconds are up. That means please bring your point to a close. If not, I will say please bring your point to a close. If it becomes a problem, which I know it won't, this is a gentleman's debate, we will cut off microphones. I want to turn our attention now to our panelist, Steve Shamrance, who has the opening question for our candidates tonight.
Speaker Fitzgerald, of your opponent, Mr. Hovde, you've said a hedge fund manager is not the most popular thing to be these days. Mr. Hovde is clearly a successful businessman. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I think just from a perspective of, from the general public, of the bailouts that have happened and Wall Street, and I don't know if people can distinguish between hedge fund manager and somebody that hasn't been involved with Wall Street. So it's difficult. It's difficult to run from that perspective, I think, just from the public perception that's out there.
Very good. Sir, any follow-up question that you would like to add here?
Well, you said that it's hard to distinguish. Why would you make a claim like that at a time when we need actual very specific things said by candidates? Why would you make a broad generalization like that?
I'm saying the general public cannot distinguish between somebody who works on Wall Street and somebody who's a hedge fund manager. That's what I meant by it. Not that I wasn't being specific, that people out there have a hard time with that. And I'm sure that if you ask somebody do hedge fund managers work on Wall Street or where they work, they'd have a tough time distinguishing whether they do or not.
I would like to offer a rebuttal here, if you would.
Look, I find it interesting. My main business is community banks. I started a financial service advisory company back in 1987. I hate to date myself because it's been 25 years. I started with $5,000 of my own money, built that company. I then bought my first community bank. Then I launched an asset management business, which is what a hedge fund is. I'm very proud of the success I've had. I've never worked on Wall Street, never lived in New York. I have been the single biggest critic about Wall Street, the bailouts, and the egregious behavior that they've conducted over the last 10 years.
Time is up. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Let's move on to another question, and Christian Schneider on our panels.
Okay. Congressman Neumann, in the famous Citizens United case, the Supreme Court in 2010 upheld the right of third-party groups to be involved in electioneering. When asked about the case shortly after the decision, you said, quote, "I think they should shut down every outside source of information in this campaign except the candidates themselves. That's not constitutional, so we obviously can't do that. But if Mark Neumann got to have what he wished, that's what would happen, sir," end quote. Do you think Citizens United was wrongly decided?
Well, first off, I'm happy to say Citizens United has endorsed us in this candidacy, so we're happy to have their endorsement. But beyond that, let me just answer that directly. The point that I was trying to make is that situations like we are in here this evening, where we get face-to-face with the public and we get to communicate directly one-on-one with people, is the most desirable way to campaign as far as I am concerned. But you'll notice also in that statement that I referred back to the Constitution. I have a great deal of respect for the Constitution, and we're certainly going to honor and adhere to the rules based on our Constitution.
Kip Smith, I want to give you 30 seconds to respond to that, because you are in an interesting position as someone who may not be able to count on a lot of campaign money. Who knows how it all plays out. 30 seconds, please.
Well, that's interesting. That is true. Where never being in politics before, I definitely am at a disadvantage as far as starting from scratch. But I'll tell you, just as Congressman Neumann was pointing out, what we need to do is speak to you directly, to be your representatives. We are your employees, and we've forgotten that. We need someone to be sent back to Washington that understands that.
30 seconds. Thank you, sir. And Charlie Sykes, we'll move on to you with the next question tonight.
I have a question for Eric Hovde. First of all, condolences on the passing of your mother this week, and appreciate the fact that you were able to come today. Tammy Baldwin and the President, of course, have embraced the so-called Buffett rule. Why, as this comes up, how do you articulate why super-rich individuals should not pay at least the tax rate of the average working person?
I think this whole argument is so disingenuous for so many reasons. First of all, let's be honest. The Buffett rule, even if they enact it, is only going to generate about $42 billion in revenue over the next decade. Think of that. It's less than 0.1%. Secondly, Warren Buffett is a 70-year-old multi-billionaire who only generates his income from the sale of his stock. That is not what most small and medium-sized business people, how they generate their income. I would have loved to operate under Warren Buffett's rule and have a tax rate of only 15%. But let's get to the last issue. We want people making investments in our economy today to build that plant, to build that new building, to get people back to work. So why are you going to disincentivize them to make that investment? So it's not going to change the equation as it pertains to the deficit. I'll stop.
Mr. Fitzgerald, if you wouldn't mind, give you a chance to respond to that. 30 seconds on the topic at hand.
Well, I agree with Eric. I think the Buffett rule is really just a political ploy. We're going to see it, try and pass the United States Senate. But this is the problem. We have a president right now who is not leading this country. He is out campaigning full time, and that's all this is a campaign mode. And the Buffett rule, the answer to everything, and I believe this is the first president I've ever seen who the answer for Democrats is to add a new tax once again. Not cut spending, but to add a new tax. So once again, here we are with a president who's trying to run on a new tax.
Thank you, sir. Charlie, I'm going to go back to you. We'll just go back in order and go ahead with your question.
Okay, I want to address this both to Congressman Neumann and to Mr. Hovde. Now, all of you have been critical of aspects of the stimulus bill and the Wall Street bailouts. Did you or any company with which you are associated receive any direct or indirect benefit from either TARP or the Obama stimulus bill, Congressman Neumann?
President Bush passed a series of tax credits while he was in office, and some of those got changed and some language got twisted with them. I'm happy to say in some of the businesses that we've built, gaining employees and providing job opportunities, that some of them are involved in areas where the Bush tax cuts provided tax credits to encourage folks like myself and other people in America to invest in American equipment, and those tax credits are carried through. And in the new administration, the numbers are exactly the same, but those tax credits were used. And in fact, a company like ours invested about $2.5 million in American products and American jobs, and that's what this should be all about.
Eric Hovde?
I want to be very clear. My banks that I own and controlled never took $1 of TARP money. And let me also say something very important. What most Americans do not understand is it wasn't just TARP. There was a whole series of programs set up for the Wall Street investment banks and the giant banks, the TGLP, the TSLF, the commercial paper conduit, the PPIP. I could go on with the litany. These company executives blew up our financial system, were not held accountable in any way, shape, or form.
And if you don't mind, Charlie, I'll follow up on your question. And Kip, I'll start with you, and Jeff, I'll move on to you. So what do we do now? What do we do with the realities of this situation? What would you do?
Well, what I've been preaching on the campaign trail is common sense solutions, and we can all see that there are some real common sense solutions to all this. When we're looking at the biggest underlying issue here, the common denominator, is trying to create jobs and stimulate the economy. The biggest things we need to do is we need to get government out of the way, stop giving out the handouts, stop trying to get government in businesses' pockets, but let the free markets reign again. That's what I've been preaching from day one. We need to rein in our healthcare costs by free market-based systems. That's what made us great in the first place. We need to have the free markets reign throughout our economy and not have all these bailouts and all this extra strings attached to federal money. Anytime you take federal money, you know there's more strings and more power that you're relinquishing. This needs to end. We need to let what America has done for 200 years reign again.
And Mr. Fitzgerald, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, when we were trying to create jobs, we started out this session, we created 10 different pieces of legislation that were signed into law in the first month of January. And what it was designed to do was exactly what Kip said, get government out of the way. We looked at tax reform. We looked at litigation reform. We passed the largest tort reform package of anybody in the country, frivolous lawsuits that were against business. You have to create a climate where people either want to locate their business here or expand their business. We have to do this in the global market.
30 seconds. Thank you very much. Now we turn to our panelist again, Christian Schneider. You are up for a question.
Okay, this is for Speaker Fitzgerald. After Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan, some suggested the U.S. get tougher with Pakistan due to its history of harboring terrorists. Others urged treading lightly as Pakistan has nuclear capabilities and has been an important ally in the war on terror. What should we do with Pakistan?
Yeah, I think Pakistan has become a purely transactional country now, and I think that's the real problem. And with all the corruption that's there, I think that when we look at the Middle East and look at Afghanistan and Pakistan at the border there, that you're dealing with Karzai and obviously there's some connections with Pakistan as well. So purely a transactional country, and I think that anything we can do to stop a specific region or area that harbors terrorists, I think we have to do whatever we can do to protect our country and to protect against attack against America again.
Candidates, you are doing exceedingly well following the rules of this debate, finishing up well within time. I'm very proud and very pleased of you right now already. You can take your full 60 seconds if you'd like. If you don't need it, that's fine. But I would like to open up that question. It's a very important foreign policy question, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to turn that to Mr. Neumann.
Well, I think when we talk about the Middle East, I think we need to understand that anything that happens there impacts us right here at home, because if that is disrupted in that part of the world, we are going to see our gasoline prices go even higher. And those gasoline prices, of course, lead to less discretionary spending, and, of course, that leads us down the track of fewer jobs in this country. So we need to understand that it has an impact right here at home. I think it's also important that as you look at a country like Pakistan, that our Commander-in-Chief and ultimately the Senate ratify it, but that our Commander-in-Chief lay out a plan as to how we are going to interact with Pakistan in view of the situation that exists there today and has developed over, sorry, now I'm breaking the rules now that you said that, sorry, that has developed over the course of the last 12 to 18 months.
Yes. And we can give a little leeway, too. You did just fine. Let's move the conversation and the question again to Steve Shamraz, please.
Congressman Neumann, you've proposed a 12-year term limit for all members of Congress except those who are already there. Would that not weaken the newest members of Congress and stop them from coming together and doing things that they would like to see done and that voters are sending them to Congress to do while keeping the power in the hands of those who are grandfathered in?
Look, when I think about our founding fathers and what they envisioned for the United States of America, and then I think about what's going on in Washington, D.C. today and how this government's being run by career politicians and folks that have never spent their life anyplace other than in politics, I understand just how important it is that we get some transition there and that we get back to a legislation or legislators that are based and steeped in private sector experience, that have lived in the real world, had a job, built a business, created jobs out here in the private sector, and that business background and that experience is what we need in Washington, D.C. And the problem we have today is that with the amount of money that's involved in politics, these incumbents build up such an advantage that it is near impossible for a challenger to compete against them. And that's why we have the need for term limits. Look, I honestly believe that there are a lot of people sitting right here in this office that could go out to Washington, D.C., much like Ron Johnson has done, and do a phenomenal job leading this nation based on the Constitution of the United States of America. And I just think term limits leads us into that direction. I would add that if someone brought a term limit bill for a different number of years, I would support it, because I think it is extremely important that we return governing the United States of America to citizen legislator with business experience.
Thank you. 60 seconds. Yep. Can I do a quick follow-up, because this is a question that I think a lot of folks in the audience may have, and out in our viewing audience too. Aren't elections natural term limits? And you have time to respond to that.
Sure. Our election, are they natural term limits? Of course they are, in a fair and balanced system. But our system's out of whack today. We have career politicians, and they have such a significant advantage over a challenger that it makes it near impossible for that to happen. The Ron Johnson thing, I mean, he did a great job stepping into this. We need more people like Ron Johnson, the citizen legislator, to return. Could the people vote him out? Yes. But the problem we have in today's world is our government is so big and so far out of control that spending at the federal level gives the incumbents an advantage that is almost impossible to overcome in the society we live in. I go back to our founding fathers envisioned the United States of America governed by people with private sector experience. Remember, when they formed this government, none of them had any political experience. When they formed America, they were people coming from the private sector, pledging their lives and their freedoms in the fight to create this government that we have today. And I just think it's so important that we return to a government that is run by citizen legislators with private sector experience. I think it's absolutely essential to turn this around.
Well, you bring up a very good point. You bring up a very good point in the dialogue of this debate, and I want to give candidate Hovde a chance to respond to that, because you are, as you say, you're not a Washington insider.
Look, this is my whole speech that I've been out there talking about. I have a cute little speech about the air conditioner and how it's destroyed politics. Why? Because it brought on career politicians. Because prior to the air conditioner, guess what? People went to Washington, served, brought their skills. Most of them were small business people, farmers, local attorneys, went for the spring and fall, left Washington during the summer months because, as we all know, in Washington it can be 100 degrees and 90% humidity, and we had citizen legislators. With the advent of the air conditioning system, we have career politicians that stay there, and all they have is skills such as getting reelected, giving speeches, raising campaign contributions. When does a career politician have to manage and make a budget? They don't. What do? They tax you, or they increase the deficit. That's why we have 100% debt to our GDP and the highest tax rate in the world.
60 seconds, sir. I do believe that there are many people in this country who would say the air conditioning is for all the hot air in Washington, D.C. today. Is that?
That too.
Okay. I do want one more question, and before we get to the bottom of our hour of our debate here, things are moving along quickly, but Christian Schneider, please.
Okay. Mr. Smith, you are in the healthcare delivery business. Some Democrats say that there are elements of Obamacare that Republicans could actually support. Even Paul Ryan supports the idea of state health care exchanges. Do you think there are any parts of the president's health care law that have any merit, or do you feel it has to be scrapped altogether?
I think we have to scrap it altogether. I think you cannot have half of a wrong. I'm sorry, it's all wrong. It's 100%. We can't have a government takeover of our society and our healthcare system. I'm sorry. We need to stand firm on free market-based solutions. This is what we've been doing for 200 years. I lived this 17 years of my life in healthcare as a physical therapist, and I've seen the struggles that people have. And I've had this question asked to me on the campaign trail. Well, why can't you just reduce the prices for someone who can't afford it? Do you know why? The answer is the federal government won't let me. I would love to give my services for free to that person who can't afford it. But I can't, because now, if I do that, I have to let everyone have the same price. Thank you. That's exactly what it is. We're talking about a total government control of one of our largest parts of our economy. We can't let that happen.
Thank you, sir. I would like to hear a response to that, if that's fine, from Mr. Fitzgerald.
Yeah, well, I agree with Kip, and I'll tell you, this gets right into entitlement reform of how we need to solve our budget. We are on an unsustainable course with the entitlements that we have. The same way we did collective bargaining here in the state of Wisconsin, had to reform it. We have to do that with the entitlements. When you take Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and the interest on our debt, by the middle of next decade, all the dollars coming into the federal government are going to have to go for just those four things. And our president wants to start a new entitlement that will be the behemoth of all entitlements and will bankrupt this country.
You are watching the Wisconsin U.S. Senate debate, brought to you by Wisconsin Reporter and the Republican Party of Waukesha County. As we said, things are going quickly, and we move now from our panelists to a question from our social network. We're going to a YouTube question, and this comes from Jolene Appling from Wisconsin Family Action.
Hi, I'm Jolene Appling, president of Wisconsin Family Action. Wisconsin Family Action believes our state and our country are strong when our traditional families are independent of government, and we are weak when our families are dependent on government. What kinds of policies would you be willing to initiate and support that would help strengthen and preserve independent families? Thank you.
I'm going to direct that question to candidate Neumann to begin with.
Where to begin? As I started the evening tonight and I laid out what it means to be a conservative, I think we went through a lot of the things that she's asking. I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. I am pro-life. I do think that we have to restore the family in America, and it has to be the central unit as it has been historically through our society if we wish for this great nation to continue. There are a series of policies, but when we talk about this, a lot of times we forget about the overspending of our government and how detrimental that is to the family unit, because remember, when the federal budget is out of whack and the jobs that are lost because our government is overspending and the various impacts that has through society, that takes away job opportunities from our families, and it's also very detrimental. So, I mean, to answer that question, I am a conservative through and through. I believe in the traditional family in America, and I believe it's perhaps the single most important thing that we should be concerned about in this country.
Thank you. Candidate Hovde, I want to give you a chance to respond to this as well, because I don't think, as people start to get to know you as a candidate, I don't know exactly I don't know if they know where you stand on this particular issue.
Well, it's another thing I've been talking about, and it's something that is so profoundly concerning me. I see our society shifting from one of self-determination, self-accomplishment, and independence to one of entitlement and dependence on government. We know that's a path of destruction. We've seen it so often. You know, I like talking about statistics because I'm a financial guy, and I can give you a whole host of statistics about economics, but probably the most troubling one for me is a social statistic, and that is we now have 4 out of 10 children born in this country out of wedlock. We know that leads to higher poverty rates, higher incarceration rates for those young children, higher dropout rates, higher rates of depression. It is devastating to them. We have to do everything we can to support the family unit. And we have to stop government policies that reward those that are having children out of wedlock and harming people that are having children in marriage.
Thank you, sir. I would once again like to introduce our tremendous panel here, reintroduce you to them. Steve Shamraz, of course, from today's TMJ4, an anchor and investigative reporter, very well known to southeast Wisconsin and much of Wisconsin. Christian Schneider, of course, who joins us as a frequent contributor from National Review, and of course Charlie Sykes here from AM 620 WTMJ, Midday with Charlie Sykes. And speaking of Charlie, let me turn the table back to you, and a question, please, sir.
Okay, Speaker Fitzgerald, you mentioned the collective bargaining reforms. You obviously were one of the architects of the collective bargaining reforms dealing with the public sector. Do you support right-to-work legislation for the private sector as well?
Yeah, I would support right to work, and now we've seen that states around us, Indiana, I know the House in Minnesota has passed it as well. I think when you look at from tax structures and places that are able to do business that are doing well, a lot of these states are right to work states, and it was something I would support. There was some talk of it. I think when we were doing the collective bargaining agreement, and we weren't sure if the governor and everybody wanted to go that far. We thought we'd take this first step. But I'll tell you, collective bargaining, and this is something we debated on the floor for 63 straight hours. But I'll tell you, we passed something that fundamentally will change the course of Wisconsin for generations.
If you don't mind, I'd like to follow up on that point, sir, if I could. Wisconsin reporter earlier, a couple of months ago, talked to the governor's office and asked, will this be coming up this session, the session that just ended? And at that time we were told this is off the table. And I'm curious as to why that was. My thinking, perhaps, was that Wisconsin's legislature and Wisconsin's governor were going through a great deal already. You had a lot on your plate. But let me ask you, why didn't the issue come up at that time?
Yeah, well, anytime you're dealing with the legislature, you have to deal with are the votes there. And I don't think at the time we would have had the votes to support right to work in the legislature last year at this time. But I thought that, the collective bargaining bill that we did really put us on the map of reforming. And, share a quick story with you. I was standing in an airport down in Atlanta, and I didn't realize how big this was for us. And a guy tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around. He stuck out his hand. He said, "Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald." And I said, "What part of Wisconsin are you from?" He said, "I'm not from Wisconsin. The entire country is watching what you guys did. So keep up the good work."
Thank you, sir. Let's now go to Steve Shamraz, and a question from you, sir.
Mr. Hovde, it appears that one and maybe two Supreme Court vacancies could come up during what would be your first term in the Senate. Apart from not be a scandal, what would make a nominee a non-starter for you?
I think we have to judge our Supreme Court nominees by will they follow the Constitution. The framework that our founding fathers gave us, it allowed us to become the greatest country in the history of mankind. It troubles me so greatly that we've had judicial activism and swinging us from this direction and that direction. Now we have a president who is trying to shame or push the Supreme Court to a decision that he wants. It's fundamentally wrong. So from my standpoint, do you follow the Constitution? That is the key requirement.
If you don't mind, I'd like to build on your question and turn it to candidate Kip Smith.
Oh, thank you. Well, I agree with what Eric was saying. And one thing that we have to remember is when you have the career politicians there making the decisions and someone who's looking at their next election and how it's going to look, this is where the problem comes in, where it's not just the right candidate or holding up a certain candidate, is how is this going to look? How is this going to play out for me politically? This is something that I will not do. I'm not there to be that person. I'm there to stand up and say, you know what, you're not qualified.
Christian Schneider, question, please.
I have a question for Congressman Neumann. You ran a rough primary in 2010 against Scott Walker and engaged in some practices that Walker's supporters actually thought were kind of dirty tricks, such as perpetuating a rumor that Walker would drop out of the race and run for lieutenant governor. With Walker currently enjoying an 85% approval rating among Republicans, how do you intend to mend fences with Walker's supporters?
I think that question was answered the morning after the primary ended. When a candidate gets up after you've lost a primary, you have basically three choices. You can pout, you can do what the media would like you to do, and that's drive a wedge between you and the person you lost to, or you can get your act together and go support that person and make sure that our voters and our supporters in the 42 counties in the state of Wisconsin that we won get behind Scott Walker and help him get elected. So on the morning after that race, we got up and went to the Unity Breakfast. I worked with Scott in public appearances during his campaign that fall, and I worked my tail off to make 100% sure that the voters that were supporting us in that primary, in those 42 counties that we won in particular, wound up voting for Scott Walker, and it is part of the reason that we have Governor Scott Walker today, and we're working for his reelection. Let me add one more thing to that, because I think it's really important. As we look at the reelection of Governor Scott Walker, this has become a top priority. Every place we go, we talk about the fact that the most important race in America today, more important than our Senate race, is Scott Walker, and I'm happy to say my wife and I are financial supporters and totally behind him.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to take the question to the Assembly Speaker, Jeff Fitzgerald. You have told me, you have told many in the media that no candidate is as closely tied to Governor Scott Walker as you. And this is a candidate, it's an issue at the Republican side, the primary side now, but do you have any concerns about that link as you move forward for should you be the candidate, you're the Republican candidate for a general election?
No, I would not shy away from anything that we were able to accomplish. Myself and Governor Walker and my brother, I think, had probably one of the most significant sessions for conservatives that we've ever seen in the state of Wisconsin. And I'll tell you, a lot of people are trying to attach themselves to Scott Walker. I'm joined at the hip. I mean, there was just a article from the Progressive magazine down in Madison that said I am Scott Walker's hand-picked candidate. Nobody told him that yet, but that's what it said. But no, I have a great relationship with the governor. He's done a fantastic job in leading us, and it's been quite a session. It's been an honor to serve as Speaker with him.
Thank you. The table back now to Charlie Sykes.
When all the candidates appeared on my Insight 2012 show, including Governor Thompson, there was one issue that you did disagree on pretty strongly, and I wanted to bring this up again. Public opinion shows declining support for the war in Afghanistan, and I guess I want to start with Eric Hovde. Would you support an expedited military pullout from Afghanistan?
I have said for now some time, and I'm the one who took the position, we need to get out. There is no reason we should spend any more of our young people's blood or our treasure in that country. I don't understand why we're trying to remake a society there, build roads, build schools, when we have economic needs back home. If we feel that we need to protect our interests, there is no reason we cannot use one of the bases in adjoining countries or put a base right in Afghanistan, bring our soldiers inside it. Don't let them be out there where they're risking their lives. We've been there way too long. It's time to get out.
If you don't mind, a follow-up with Mr. Neumann. You have been in a position in Washington, D.C. to vote on whether funding should be allocated for defense measures. How do you feel about Mr. Sykes' question?
Well, I think what's missing in Afghanistan today is that we do not know what the mission is. It is the obligation of our commander-in-chief to lay out for us exactly what it is and how it impacts the American people. Why is it that our troops are in Afghanistan, or take any other nation of that sort that you want to talk about? So I think the first thing, it's incumbent upon our commander-in-chief to lay out exactly how it impacts us. The second thing that I want from our commander-in-chief is I want to know what the plan is to achieve the mission. So they set out what the mission is and how it impacts us. I want to know how we're going to get there. And I want an estimate of costs for both dollars and people.
Do you want out of Afghanistan?
I also want to be able to measure when we've achieved. What I want them to do is lay out a plan.
Thank you. How do you feel? Do you feel we should be in Afghanistan or we should be out?
You need a plan that tells what we're doing there and how we're going to get out of there when we can measure that we have been successful at accomplishing our mission.
Yes or no?
And I'm not. It's not that easy. What President Obama is doing is disastrous for this country because he has set a timetable to pull our troops out, and that's going to lead to deaths of men and women in uniform of the United States of America.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you, sir. Let's go to another question now. Christian Schneider, I'm going to go back to you.
Okay. This one is for Speaker Fitzgerald. Normally in these debates, when you ask a question about illegal immigration, the answer is always, well, we need to secure the borders. So, we know that. The real question is, what do we do with the 12 million illegal immigrants that are currently in this country right now?
Yeah, and immigration obviously is a difficult issue and something that I think is probably going to be an issue for the Republican Party if we're going to reach out to Hispanic voters. And this is obviously the issue that's always been a sticking point. And I've always believed that Hispanic voters match up better with Republicans than they do Democrats. But from the last few elections we've seen, that's been a problem. But no, I think that I would not grant amnesty to those Latino community now. I think if you're going to do it, you got to do it the same way. My great-grandfather came over and went through citizenship and became a citizen when he came over from Ireland, and that's the way I think it should be done now.
Kip Smith, what is your position on the immigration issue?
Well, I agree we need to secure our borders. It's absolutely unbelievable that in this time frame that we've had a war on terror for how many years, and we still don't have a secure border? That's ridiculous. We need to secure our borders, but we also need to give the people who are here, if they are hardworking citizens, well, not citizens yet, but hard workers that don't have criminal records, I don't think we need to give them amnesty. That's not the answer. But what we need to give them is an accelerated path to citizenship. There was a gentleman who, a case that I was brought up to, where he was going to be deported, and his family was going to be able to stay here. We need to give him an advocacy program where he goes through just real quick, he goes through the regular process, but the process now takes years.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to hold it right there and to abide by the 30 seconds. I appreciate your point. One more question here quickly, and I want to turn it to Steve Shamraz again, please.
Congressman Neumann, an individual senator has a remarkable amount of power to hold up a single piece of legislation or to stop an appointment in its tracks. Should Senate rules on the filibuster and other secret holds be reformed?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's very important that the role of a senator to prevent something like a Supreme Court justice that is not should not be seated, to stop that from happening, or to stop some of the other bad things that are happening from our government, I think that's an important role. And I can tell you that when I get there, I'm going to keep looking at this book. It's got Constitution of the United States of America, and I'm going to ask that every piece of legislation that they try to bring through there document someplace in this Constitution as to where that government gets the power to do it. And I think when you talk about the ability to slow that down of one senator, if they don't have the power to pass something and it's not documented in our Constitution that they are empowered to do it, I think the filibuster is a good way to stop some of the things that are happening in Washington, D.C. today.
It's a great question. And I'm going to redirect to Jeff Fitzgerald, please.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. I think there's a reason why our founding fathers and why we have those rules of the Senate. And I would agree with that when you have a bad piece of legislation coming down the pike that, with the minority and with having 60 members of the Senate, I absolutely think that that power should stay in place.
Thank you. You are tuned in to the U.S. Senate debate of Republican candidates by the Wisconsin Reporter, also sponsored by the Republican Party of Waukesha County. Coming up at the top of the hour, we're going to take a quick intermission. Going to give a chance for our candidates to relax a little bit and then come back in. We're going to move into a social network form of questioning where we're going to take questions from Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all of the forums that we're communicating on today. If you want to communicate in the audience, you have a question or watching us via video right now, if you would like to ask the candidates a question, you can do so very easily on Twitter at hashtag WI debate. Just that easy. Obviously, we're not going to get to all the questions. We've got a lot of questions coming in, but we will do that coming up in the second half of the debate, a 30-minute segment that will be driven basically by the voters of Wisconsin and people who are online and care to enter this dialogue with the candidates. And so I do remind you once again, you can do that and stay tuned in. Going to turn the question right now, back to the panel, and Christian Schneider, a question for the panel, please.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Hovde. In criticizing Governor Thompson for not attending this debate, you said, quote, "The people of Wisconsin deserve to know where all of the candidates stand on the issues, including the ones who have spent most of their lives in public office building a less than conservative record," end quote. As someone who hasn't been in public office and who once contributed money to Jim Doyle, what do you feel you have done to build a record that conservatives can support?
That's a good one. Look, I wish Governor Thompson was here tonight. You know, obviously, I just had a family loss, losing my mother, and I decided it was important to be here so the citizens of this great state could understand where I stand on the issues. And I think it's unfortunate that Governor Thompson decided to be at a fundraiser in Washington, D.C. I don't think you follow a man's words. I think you follow a man's actions. And the simple fact is, the way I have lived my life and how I've managed my businesses and the foundation that I have created and the things that I've done, I think speak much more loudly than anything I can say standing up here at a podium. So, you know, I look forward to debating Governor Thompson. I hope he will join us at some debate at some point in time. And I look forward to talking about my record as well as his record.
Thank you, sir. Christian, I think that question certainly speaks on its own. So I'm going to turn a question now to Charlie Sykes.
I think it's pretty obvious that if you look at the stage here, that this stage pretty much looks like America if America was middle-aged white guys. So, Speaker Fitzgerald, you know, in the general election campaign, the Democrats nationally and in the state are going to accuse Republicans of waging a war on women. How are you going to respond to that?
Yeah, and I've seen that from the top down. And once again, when you can't run on a record, you have to run on the politics of envy. And what they're going to do is pit person against person. We see it from President Obama. We'll see it all the way through the U.S. Senate races, congressional races, and they're even doing it down in state Senate and state assembly races. This is their mantra. And, you know, the people that are really being hurt are the middle-class folks and middle-class women because of the debt that's being driven up each and every day, and the interest rates that could rise with the bond markets that we have, that food prices, gas prices, that's people are really being hurt. So we're not waging a war on women. Once again, look away from what's really going on because we can't run on our record. So that's how I'll address that.
Thank you, sir. It's a good question, and it certainly deserves a bit more expounding upon. And if you don't mind, Candidate Neumann, I'll turn that to you.
I think it's an important discussion because the real war on women is the passage of things like Obamacare, where $500 billion is taken out of our Medicare system, putting many of our senior women at risk and middle-aged women as they approach Medicare. I think the real war on women is deficit spending that's led our economy to a point where we're somehow praising 8% unemployment. For goodness sakes, 8% unemployment was unheard of before this president took office. The real issues is how do we recreate a society, an America, where there are opportunities for men and women to be promoted in their jobs because there are job opportunities to make a better life for themselves and their family as they move forward.
I'll stop you there. Thank you very much. We have time for a couple more questions tonight, and I want to make sure it's been such a great debate, a lot of conversation here today, a lot of ideas expressed. I want to move over again to Steve Shamraz, if you don't mind, and a question for our candidates.
Congressman Neumann, a question on immigration. While a member of Congress, you showed some willingness to allow skilled workers into the country. You actually voted to double the number of visas for skilled workers. Today, 12 years later, what kind of immigration reform programs could you get behind if they came up for a vote?
Well, I think it's important to note there that is legal entry into the United States with a set of skills where there were job opportunities available is I believe, what you're referring to there. And that's a lot different than illegal immigration. I would like to see policies set, and it was mentioned before, obviously the first thing you have to do is you have to secure our borders. We have to get to a point where we can stop illegal entry into this country and go back to encouraging legal immigration to the United States of America the way it's been throughout our history and our society. As far as the immigration and the situation we're in here in America today, I think we have to abide by the laws that are on our books, and I think that should be the approach to immigration as we move forward. But what you're asking about there, the entry of skilled labor in a legal means, I would certainly support that sort of activity, and I would certainly support legal immigration into the United States of America as we move forward, and especially as we get into a job recovery situation. And again, I think this is a different discussion with 8% unemployment or 8.25% unemployment.
Thank you, sir. A reminder again that we will have closing statements at the end of the debate coming up after the 30-minute social network portion of the program. That's the segment that comes up at the end of the debate, and we will do those closing statements at the end of the time. Charlie Sykes, I'm going to turn it over to you, if you don't mind, for one final question tonight.
Sure. I want to ask Eric Hovde this question. Is there any circumstance under which you would vote to raise the debt ceiling?
I think probably the most irresponsible thing that current politicians have done over the last 2 decades is that they have constantly raised the debt ceiling without any strict conditions or teeth that would end up with a balanced budget. So if there were no stringent conditions that would get us to a balanced budget within 2 to 3 years' time, cap spending in the future, and move towards a balanced budget amendment, no, I would not vote for it. If you could say in 2 years we're going to be in a balanced budget, there's a hard cap, and we're moving towards a balanced budget, because we may all end up there. One of us will, and there could be a debt ceiling limit vote right when we land. So the only way I would do that is if there was absolute ironclad teeth that this budget is going to be balanced within a 24-month period of time.
This is a very important question. It's at the core of what we are talking about in this debate, and I want to turn the question back over to candidate Fitzgerald.
Yeah, we don't have a taxing problem in Washington, D.C. We have a spending problem. And the same way we balanced the budget in Wisconsin, a $3.6 billion deficit, was, what did we do? We cut spending. We didn't raise your taxes. And what else did we do? We put in a permanent property tax freeze with revenue limits. That's what we have to do on the national level as well. You have to cut, cap, and balance. And that's when it's going to get this country back in the right direction.
This is an important question.
Well, I agree with Mr. Hovde and Jeff. I agree with them. But one problem that we face is that even though we probably all like the fact of an ironclad guarantee, we all know, I think, from reality that it's not going to happen. So when we're talking about raising the debt ceiling, I've actually had this question on the campaign trail. There's only one way I would do it, and it's for eminent national defense. That's it. We can't afford it. We're already borrowing way too much money. We need to get our fiscal house in order, cut the programs that need to be cut as far as our redundancies we saw in the GAO report from 2010 for the federal government, and we need to bring our house back to fiscal order.
Stop you right there, Mr. Neumann. Please, 30 seconds.
Well, the significant thing here is I've already been there. I've been in this battle, and I've been under fire. And we held our ground to not raising that debt ceiling to a point where we actually, quote, shut down government. Now, it's important to understand what shut down government means. It means that the non-essential government employees went home. Now, I have a little problem with that because I always ask the question if they were non-essential government employees. But the point is, we effectively used the debt ceiling fight to bring us to a balanced federal budget. When I was in Washington, we got the budget balanced in a 4-year period of time and actually got it into surplus.
I need to close you right there. Thank you very much. That's your first hour of this debate. I want to, if you wouldn't mind, applause for the candidates, and in particular, applause for our panel. Excellent questions tonight. I want to thank once again Steve Shamras from WTMJ4, Christian Schneider, who is a contributor to National Review, and Charlie Sykes, of course, from WTMJ 620 AM. Thank you very much, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind. Excellent questions tonight. Stay tuned. This is your U.S. Senate debate from Wisconsin Reporter.
Stay tuned. Our web debate with questions from voters from Facebook and Twitter will begin after this brief intermission.
Hi, my name is Kirsten Adshead. I'm the investigative reporter for Wisconsin Reporter. Wisconsin Senate race has the potential of playing an integral role in determining which political party controls the U.S. Senate after the November election. Joining me now is a man well versed in politics, particularly Wisconsin politics. John McAdams teaches political science at Marquette University and has graciously agreed to come here tonight to provide some insight, some analysis about this Senate race, Wisconsin politics, and give us a little idea of what's to come in the coming months as we head towards these incredibly important elections in November. Thanks for being here.
Oh, good to be here.
Let's start with a little context, if you would.
Yeah.
There are 33 U.S. Senate races this year, about 10 or so considered truly competitive, including Wisconsin's.
Yeah.
Why is Wisconsin on the list? Why is this a competitive race?
Well, we can talk about competition in two ways. We can talk about competition for control of the Senate. The best people who can handicap these elections, one's a fellow named Charlie Cook, another's a guy named Stu Rothenberg, basically say Republicans have 47 seats now. They're likely to pick up 2 or 3 or 4 and maybe 5. It matters tremendously whether they pick up 2 and don't control the chamber, or pick up 4 and do control the chamber. Charlie Cook, for example, calls Wisconsin a toss-up. This race is toss a coin. It's as likely to be won at the moment, it appears, by the Democrat or by the Republican. Now, why is Wisconsin so competitive? Essentially because Wisconsin's a purple state. Wisconsin in 2004 went with the Democrat for the presidency, but only by a razor-thin margin. Shifted pretty heavily toward Obama in 2008, which might say, oh ho, we're a blue state, but then shifted back sharply Republican in 2010. So Wisconsin is a battleground state. And that's why people like Charlie Cook are calling the Senate race a toss-up. Liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans are very evenly divided in this state. And you've seen it in a series of elections. For example, let's go back about a year to the Supreme Court election, which was very, very close, but the Republican won. You saw it in recalls in August, where the Democrats picked up a couple, but did not sweep. But that's simply the lay of the land in Wisconsin.
Any of the gentlemen here would love to help the Republican Party regain control of the U.S. Senate. There is, however, one noticeable absence tonight. Former Governor Tommy Thompson, considered a frontrunner in the race, I think it's fair to say, and yet he has yet to participate in any debate, not just this one. The Thompson campaign counters that he has participated and will continue to participate in joint appearances, but that's not the same as an official debate.
Right. In general, front runners shy away from debates. In general, front runners are loath to debate because they have a lot to lose. There could be a gaffe. Ask Rick Perry, who for something like 3 days was the front runner on the Republican side in the presidential race. Okay, so there's a possibility of a gaffe. There's a possibility of being perceived to have made a poor showing. So for the front runner, there are a lot of risks and not necessarily a lot of reward. Obviously, for dark horse candidates, the calculation is very different. A dark horse candidate needs the exposure. A dark horse candidate needs to impress people. This early in this particular Wisconsin Senate election, it's not so much average voters that need to be impressed, but elites, people who are paying attention. Someone who's not taken very seriously sometimes with a good performance in a debate can begin to be taken seriously. And I think to a degree that happened with Rick Santorum, who was essentially a nobody in the race very early on, but then with a combination of good debate performances and some opponents who self-destructed, he became the main opponent of Mitt Romney. So dark horse candidates, yes, do have things they can gain in a debate. Front runners, a little more questionable.
The elephant in the room with this race is not actually this race. It's the recalls that we see coming forward against Governor Scott Walker, Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch, and 4 state senators. The primaries in those races are scheduled for May 8th, recall election scheduled for June 5th. What effect do those recalls, particularly the recall of the governor, have on this U.S. Senate race?
Not as much as you might think. Clearly, there are going to be some activists, and I know a fair number of them among my Marquette students, who will be working on the recall, not working on the Senate race, although I've seen several outside tonight who are working on the Senate race. So some amount of attention will be drawn away from this Senate race. It is the case, however, that in all elections things ramp up near the end. And between the June recall election and the August Republican primary, there are several weeks for things to ramp up. And once they start to ramp up, they can ramp up really quickly. A lot of activists, a lot of people who want to work. The recall is over now. You can start working for your favorite Senate candidate. So I don't think it has a huge effect. Certainly where money is concerned, some people say, well, is the money in Wisconsin going to be dried up? The truth is the money in all of these races is overwhelmingly national. Huge amounts of money come in nationally. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, which is sort of a lefty group, but their numbers are okay, has shown this. Outside money comes in very large quantities, and that makes sense because very important things for the entire nation are at stake in Wisconsin. So there's going to be lots of money for the Democratic primary and the recall. There's going to be lots of money when Walker faces the Democratic candidate. There's going to be lots of money in this Republican senatorial primary, and heaven knows there's going to be tons of money in November.
So no shortage of attention or money in any race that you see coming forward?
No shortage of money, and a pretty substantial number of activists who will be very busy working for their favorite candidate.
For the losing side of the recalls, whichever party that may be, will the loss be demoralizing for their money supporters, for their volunteers, or will it encourage them to get out in fuller force in November?
Probably not, because I think we're talking about people who are pretty political. And you lose an election, you're still political. You still look forward to the next one. You win an election, it whets your appetite for the next one. So I think we're talking about a class of people, activists, for example, and again, some of my students, who like politics, and yes, regardless of how the recall turns out, they're going to continue to like politics and are going to be active.
A month from now, the Republican Party of Wisconsin will hold its convention in Green Bay, and they plan to endorse a candidate for the U.S. Senate. What do Thompson, what do the candidates here tonight have to do? What is the winning message to earn that endorsement?
Number one, I'm not sure they can do a lot to earn the endorsement because I think the people at that convention are going to already have a favorite and are unlikely to have their mind changed. It's possible that a good performance tonight by a dark horse candidate could cause some Republican activists, some political elites to say, wait a minute, somebody we'd largely written off or we hadn't paid much attention to is worth paying some attention to. So it's a long shot, but it's possible.
Do you anticipate that by the time the convention arrives, the decision will essentially be made, that the Republicans will have a consensus candidate for who they would like to represent them in the November election, probably against Democrat U.S. Representative Tammy Baldwin?
I don't think there's going to be a consensus. Very broadly speaking, there are a couple of wings of the Republican Party, a sort of establishment wing, okay, and a kind of insurgent wing, maybe associated with the Tea Party, people who are serious fiscal conservatives. in the Paul Ryan mode, for example. I can mention someone who's not running for Senate right now. And those two wings of the party, yes, have a very different vision, and they'll unite only after the primary and only after it's clear who is the Republican standard bearer.
Campaign, however, and
no, there's not going to be any uniting before the primary. They're going to fight for their views. They're going to fight for their opinions.
Do you have any sense of who will win that endorsement?
Oh, gosh, my sources among Republican activists aren't that good. I really don't know. If I had to bet, I'd bet on Tommy Thompson.
If Republicans win control of this seat, it'll be the first time since 1957 that the Republican Party has controlled both U.S. Senate seats. How tantalizing is that for Republicans, and how likely do you think that is that they will achieve that goal?
Well, I don't think that many people are going to pay attention to that precise fact. I think what's really tantalizing is Republican control of the Senate. Now, neither party is going to have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. That's not in the cards. But control of the chamber, for example, control of committees, which goes to the majority party, control of what gets voted on the floor of the Senate, which is decided by the Senate majority leader. Those things are terribly important. So what's really tantalizing is the fact that in a national Senate race that's, this close, Wisconsin could be, if it goes Republican, from the standpoint of Republican activists, it could be the state that flips the Senate Republican. 51-49 or maybe, 52-48. That's possible.
For all the talk about who Republicans support, who Democrats support, ultimately it's a question of who are the voters going to support. What do voters need to hear this year? What are they looking for? What are they not seeing? What do they need to see in order to go to the ballot either in August or the general election in November and say, that's my candidate?
Candidates matter. Some candidates are better than others. My guess is that the key factor is not going to be anything about the candidates, but how is the economy doing? That'll be key in the Obama re-election campaign, but those perceptions of how the economy is doing do filter down to races below that, the House and the Senate. If unemployment continues to tick downward at a steady rate, it'll be a good year for Democrats, a relatively good year for Democrats. If, for example, if on the other hand, the economy seems to stall and the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, is saying unemployment is going to tick up, well, with those kind of forecasts and $2 you can get a cup of coffee at George Webb's, but if that happens, and it could happen, it's going to be a bad year for Democrats and a good year for Republicans. So I think less is assuming candidates who aren't just flat bad candidates. And I expect pretty good candidates in this race on both the Democratic and Republican side. The state of the economy is really going to be terribly important.
Do you anticipate, we obviously have several races going on, do you anticipate that Wisconsin voters are going to vote for a party or candidates, individual candidates?
It's a mix. Some people have a well-formed party identification. Some people are in the middle. They call themselves independents. And how they vote is based on a mix of motives. For example, the economy, we political scientists can easily prove is very, very important. Yes, sometimes the characteristic of candidates can matter. Some candidates are better than other candidates. Some candidates occasionally blow their election by running incompetent campaigns. That happens. But I do think, again, the overwhelming factor is going to be how does the economy do?
Do you anticipate that there will be any, if people are unhappy with, there's kind of negativity in some primaries and others, there will be bleed over into other races?
You mean the negativity in the Republican presidential primaries? People think they don't like negative advertising, and they don't like negative campaigns. That's what they think. But if you actually look for hard evidence, not only do negative campaigns work, some of the best recent studies that I've seen suggest that they don't really harm the party that had a kind of nasty primary in November. Maybe that's because people aren't really too hoity-toity. The old saying, politics is a full contact sport, maybe. And part of it may simply be the fact that even when the primary season ends relatively late, it's been many, many months till November, and whatever perceptions they had during the primary, however unhappy they might have been during the primary, all of that information and all those perceptions have been overwritten by much more recent material.
John McAdams, Marquette University political scientist, thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Kirsten Adshead, Wisconsin reporter. Enjoy the rest of the debate.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could have you take your seats, we're ready for our second segment in tonight's debate, which will be driven by your questions at home, online, of course, and here in the audience. 30 minutes only. It's going to be fast. It's going to be furious. It's like lightning round, if you will, in some of the game show. Somebody told me tonight that I have the appearance of a game show host. I don't know how to take that necessarily, but hey, Pat Sajak was a pretty good-looking guy. Okay, so anyway, we're all set and ready. We've got a number of questions from our social network. If you still want to tune in to that and to ask a question via the social networks, remember it's hashtag WI Debate. Hashtag WI Debate. I want to begin the conversation, and we're going to go lightning round, as I said. It's going to come to one of you. We'll maybe pick up on another, and we'll just go that way. So here we are. Nancy Einhorn asked this question on email. How would you respond to the proposal that 1% of the people should pay more taxes, and that would be fair? I'm going to start here in alphabetical order with candidate Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I would respond to that. I think the same way we respond all night is that I don't think that we need to have more revenues coming in. We have to cut spending, and obviously the president's answer and the Democrats' answer to everything is to tax more. And when you look at that individual tax and the way small businesses are set up, you're going to hurt a lot of small businesses, the LLCs, the S corporations, and it's really not a fair way of taxation when it comes to small business. And what is that going to do? That is going to hurt job growth. Because you know what? In the state of Wisconsin, 80% of the corporations are made up of small businesses. So if we don't want to get this economy turned around and want to get people working again, we have to do everything we can in our power to keep those small businesses active and get them hiring again.
Thank you, sir. This is a question for candidate Neumann, and this is from Joe Oyman, Jr. At a debate in Appleton on March 24th, you stated you were against means testing for Social Security. Mr. Oyman's question is, don't we need to do something to make the program solvent, and isn't refusing reform simply protecting the entitlements you claim to be against? His words, sir.
Look, I think when you talk about means testing, especially as it relates to Social Security, that's a very important question. I always ask the question in return. If you have two people that have worked their entire lives at the same job, and they earned exactly the same money all through their working years, and they get to retirement age, and one of those two people has gone on extravagant vacations, bought a new car every year, literally spent their money, and they reach retirement, and they don't have their resources put away for themselves. But the second person, who earned the same amount of money all through their career, saved up for themselves to take care of themselves in their own retirement. Under this system of means testing, what we would do is punish the person who saved up to take care of themselves and accepted their personal responsibility. And we would effectively reward the person that did what, and I'm not going to call it wrong or anything, but certainly did not accept personal responsibility to save up to take care of themselves in their own retirement. So that's my position on means testing. I would just add, as it relates to the entitlements, the Obamacare bill that took $500 billion out of Medicare is certainly making the situation worse for entitlements across the board, and it needs to be killed as soon as possible.
Thank you, sir. This next question comes to email, and again, as well, if you would like to add your questions, these are all from citizens, the people who will decide whether one of these gentlemen goes on to the general election. Chris Aronson asks, if you are elected, but the Senate still does not have a Republican majority, how will you break the stalemate on Capitol Hill and convince lawmakers to pass a budget and not spend beyond it? I'll turn that question first and foremost to Kip Smith.
Well, I've been going through the campaign trail and really speaking about the actual healing of the wounds that needs to happen. I'm willing to speak to anyone who's willing to seriously speak to me about the issues. And we need someone who's going to be able to do that, not be so entrenched that they can't. And I have no prior experience there as far as having to be entrenched in one camp or another. I'm a strict, strong conservative, but that doesn't mean I can't talk to people. When we're looking at a stalemate, what we need to do is bring the facts to bear. And this is what I've been doing in my campaign. Bringing the facts of common sense conservatism back to bear, that we can't afford these things. Like we're talking about the entitlements, we're talking about Social Security. Well, two things that are stifling this is that, one, our elderly population is growing and we are not repopulating this country. Our demographics are shrinking. The only reason we're staying at the same population is for immigration. So we need to understand that we cannot fund that type of program the way it exists.
I'm going to hold you right there, sir. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn our question now to candidate Hovde. And this is a question, of course, that is going to come up, has come up, and will continue to come up a great deal as we move forward. This one is from Twitter at WI Debate, # WI Debate. Republicans need to formulate an alternative to Obamacare. What would your health care reform plan look like?
I think this is a very important question because let's think of it this way. We know in the private sector, the farther you remove decisions from the ground level, and in this case from the community, and move it up through the hierarchy to the state government and then on to the federal government, the poorer decisions you receive. We need to push our healthcare system back in a private sector direction. The two areas in our country that have had the greatest rate of inflation, cost increase over the last 20 years are healthcare and our higher education system. What are the two similarities between those two issues? It is massive government involvement. So I think we need to move our healthcare system in a private sector approach, allow people to make choices for themselves, have it operate at the ground and community level.
Thank you, sir. This is a full social network segment of this debate. We're going to turn our attention to a YouTube question, and this comes from one of our broadcast partners in this event, Red State, and Tony Katz.
Hello there, everybody. Tony Katz from AllPatriotsMedia.com. When we think about senators, we popularly elect them today, but that's not the way the Founding Fathers had it. State legislatures picked who senators would be to represent the best interests of the state. So keeping that in mind, what are the best interests of the state of Wisconsin that you will make sure get brought to light in the Senate?
Mr. Neumann, we'll start with you.
I think the answer to that question is the most important thing we can do for the people of the state of Wisconsin is get us back to a balanced budget before this fiscal mess, the worst track record in history by President Obama as it relates to finances. We need to get it corrected. For that reason, I've written a 5-year plan to balance the federal budget by cutting spending and ending Obamacare. So when you ask what do we need to do for the state of Wisconsin, balance the federal budget so the federal government is not taking the money out of the private sector. It's important to understand that as government comes to balance as opposed to taking $1.3 trillion out of the private sector, that money that they're not borrowing out of the private sector then becomes available in the private sector for our businesses to borrow, to grow and expand and create jobs. That's how you grow an economy. You do not grow an economy with TARP and stimulus and bailouts and more government. You grow an economy by getting the government out of the way, shrinking government spending, leaving more money in the private sector, because when that money is in the private sector, the people that have it are either going to save it or spend it, and either of those lead to economic growth and development and job creation. That's what we need in Wisconsin.
Mr. Smith, I'd like to turn that same question to you.
Well, I agree with what Congressman Neumann is saying, But first and foremost, this is the whole reason why I'm in this fight. People ask me all the time, why don't you go for state senate or assembly? Because the fight is in the federal government. Our federal government is a central power that's dictating to our state. We need to reinstate our Constitution to bring it back to bear so our 10th Amendment means something. It's time that we had a senator stand up for the state and the state's sovereignty, first and foremost.
Thank you, sir. This question now comes from Twitter and Maggie Thurber, and she asked this. The U.S. Senate has not passed a budget in over 1,000 days. Why did I know that response was coming? Do you consider this to be a dereliction of duty? And what would you do to correct this lack of a budget? Mr. Fitzgerald, to you.
Yeah, this should be on the front pages of every newspaper across the nation. That if you were on a school board, a local city council, or even me in the state legislature, if we didn't pass a budget for over 3+ years, this is scandalous. By law, the U.S. Senate has to pass a budget every year. But guess what? Harry Reid won't do it. And why won't they do it? They won't put anything on paper because they don't have solutions. We are fortunate here in this state to have somebody like Paul Ryan, who has put out a budget plan, somebody that I support, and actually has a plan. It's just like the Democrats in this state. When we solved our budget deficit and did it through collective bargaining reform and cutting spending, they demagogued on the floor of the legislature. I said, where's your idea? How will you balance the budget? Well, we know how they did it 2 years ago. They raised taxes by $5 billion and put us in debt $3.6 billion.
Thank you, sir. This is a core issue once again, and Mr. Hovde, I'll ask you to respond to that.
What do you expect from career politicians? If I managed my business that way, I would have been out of business in my first year. I would have never been successful. My business would have never grown. Look, Wisconsin has a great senator in Ron Johnson. He is gone. He is fighting hard. But the simple fact is, you know who controls this? You. You have to get out there and work hard and put more conservatives in these spots all across this country. Because if Harry Reid still controls the Senate, we won't be able to push through a budget. That's reality. I hate it because it is putting our country on a path of destruction. But I encourage everyone, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. We need to connect the dots for all those independents that are willing to listen, to understand the financial risk we're putting ourselves at and our children at.
Thank you, sir. I think one thing is safe to say, Mr. Ryan's budget proposal has generated some conversation.
Yep.
And it's generated some conversation in this conversation tonight. This is via our friends at Red State. Conservatives hailed the Ryan plan as a bold step toward balancing the national budget. Do you support the Ryan plan? What would you do differently if you would? And Mr. Neumann, I will put that to you.
Well, I think Paul Ryan deserves a tremendous amount of credit for bringing this nation to an understanding of how serious our problems are and for making a great proposal to take us in the right direction to solve those problems. I think what we need in the United States Senate is a counterpart to that, and I think we have here in the state of Wisconsin a great opportunity to send a senator to Washington, D.C. We've spent 6 months on this plan. The numbers are here. We've got spending cuts laid out. We've got 150 specific line item entries to reduce government spending. We get to a balanced budget in a 5-year period of time by cutting spending and eliminating Obamacare. I think when you start looking at Paul Ryan in the House and perhaps Mark Neumann and Ron Johnson working together in the United States Senate, folks, I think we will not only get a budget passed in the United States Senate, I think we can balance the budget of the United States of America again so that we can restore job opportunity and economic growth in this country and preserve the opportunity to live the American dream for generations to come.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We're going to stay on this question. I'm going to let every candidate have a chance to respond to this because it is an important topic, and it is a topic that's driving conversation not only in the state of Wisconsin, nationally. And Mr. Fitzgerald, I will turn the question to you again.
Yeah, I support Paul Ryan's budget, and I'll tell you what I really support. I support people that have political courage And that's what we've done here in Wisconsin. Governor Walker and myself and my brother. It takes political courage to put a plan out there. And that's what Paul Ryan did. Even though we knew that the next day there would be ads run of him pushing senior citizens off of cliffs, there are people that will fight for the status quo. You need people that will go out there and fight for what is right, and that aren't worried about their next election, but are worried about the next generation. And that's what Paul Ryan's doing.
I believe we've reached some consensus tonight. Mr. Smith, could you add to that point?
Well, as far as the Ryan budget, I think it's very well done. Looking at something that I would change, I don't think I would change much. I can see that the two-tier tax system, as far as the 25% on corporate tax rate, as a concession by him to try and meet some middle ground for some people who won't budge. And I think that's a very smart move as the environment we're in. One thing that I would add to it is curtailing the cost of health care. Instead of trying to make it happen on the end where people are seeing the health care being paid for from the insurance companies, from Medicare, we need to cut the costs fundamentally from the start. And that's where free market-based systems are going to be the key, where patients see the price tag, are given incentives to look for the best deal, and where state borders are dissolved so that insurance carriers can compete for your business nationwide. It's very simple. So that's what I would add to it.
Mr. Hovde.
Yeah, look, I have a radio ad out there right now supporting Paul and his plan because, as Jeff said, Paul actually has the courage. We have to be honest with ourselves. It's not only Democrats, but there are a lot of big spending Republicans that don't even want to produce a plan because they don't have the courage to do it. Now, in saying that, I do think we have to go deeper. The reality of it is Paul is proposing about $5.8 trillion in cuts over the next decade. That's still going to leave us with another $5 trillion in deficit spending over that next decade. I think we have to bring our baseline budget back to 2006 before all the crazy spending started. I think we also have to focus on the growth side. We have to get revenue generation. We have to give confidence to business people out there that the federal government is not going to collapse, so they will make an investment in this economy and get jobs going and get a greater revenue into the federal government in a positive way, not through increasing taxes.
Thank you, sir. Real quickly, Mr. Neumann, I'd like to go back to you here because, excuse me, you have noted that you have a plan in place that would cut this deficit. What happens to the shock, the shock of the economy when you cut so deeply? Explain.
Cut so deeply? Cut so deeply? Let me just start with the cut so deeply. In 2008 and 2009, the federal government increased in size by 20% in 1 year. Spending went from $2.9 trillion to $3.5 trillion, a 20% increase in government spending or increase in the size of government in 1 year. So in our plan, when we bring spending down, we've got 150 items already mentioned in here, specifically mentioned as to what we can reduce spending in. I'll bet you dollars to donuts, if I went through that whole list, you wouldn't know what 50%, 25%, maybe less of those programs even are. So when you start talking about cutting, we cut 3% in actual dollars the first year, then we freeze it for the second year. If this were my business, and my counterpart up here mentioned this before, if this was our business, this would not be my plan. My plan would be to get us to balance virtually immediately. And one more thing. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. Folks, when I was in the House of Representatives, we fought so hard to stop government spending that Newt Gingrich himself kicked me off a committee because I wouldn't go along with government spending. That is what's going to be necessary to turn this thing around. You absolutely have to have a plan, and then you have to be willing to stand for that plan to a point where whatever it takes, you get the job done. Somebody asked the question before, so how do you do this if we don't have control of the Senate? Folks, it's not about control of Democrats or Republicans. It's about standing your ground and getting it passed, having a plan, and then be willing to stand up to Republicans or Democrats who want to spend too much money in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your answer. Things are moving quickly. We have just really a few minutes left with our candidates tonight. I want to get to as many questions as we can. This is coming an email from John Biebensheimer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How much of the federal government do you believe needs to be removed, and do you support, at the very least, the removal of the IRS, DEA, drug war, and the Federal Reserve? Kip Smith, I'll start with you.
Wow. I hope I got more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, you got 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Well, what I believe is that we can't sustain the level of government that we have. We already know this. So I've been advocating trying to cut it in half. Take the redundancies that we found in the GAO report for 2010, use them as a good guideline to see what agencies are living beyond their means, like the GSA. Case in point, I'd love to be in Las Vegas and doing that. It's amazing. But I'll tell you what, as far as the IRS or the Federal Reserve, I get this question all the time about the Federal Reserve. If we scrap the Federal Reserve, what has to happen is Congress now has to take control. As it is right now, I'm a little afraid of that. I don't think that's probably a great idea at this point. But is it a good idea to have them buying up our debt? I don't even know if that's legal. This is unimaginable, folks.
We'll leave it there. I want to stay on the same question because it brings up what has been talked about in this presidential race. And there's been a candidate or two who proposed this. Some have forgotten exactly what they want to cut. But it still remains. Mr. Fitzgerald, I'll bring this to you. The question stands, should we cut these sorts of programs, these agencies, and these initiatives?
Yeah, that was the Energy Department was the one he forgot. But, no. You know, I think when you're looking at budgeting, and I've been through a lot of state budgets, you have to comb through everything. Every agency, every program, because I'll tell you, there is so much waste in government, it's ridiculous. And also, and there is so much fraud that happens in some of these agencies as well. I've seen it, a ton of it here on the Medicaid side of things in the state. So, you know, whether you eliminate a complete department, I think you have to do a case-by-case study and go through a fine-tooth comb and look at every program and every agency and make them justify what they do to make sure that when you look at budgeting, where you can go from there.
Thank you, sir. This is a question from Nancy Milholland. And actually, Nancy, are you here in the crowd tonight? Hand? Hi, Nancy. Good to see you. Thank you. Nancy asked this question. And Mr. Hovde, I'm going to turn it to you. What is your position on government tax credits for green energy?
I am opposed to them wholeheartedly. Look, everything should be able to stand on its own 2 feet. If it cannot be economically viable by itself, then it should not be getting government assistance. This is crony capitalism at its worst. I've talked about Solyndra, how George Kaiser, one of President Obama's major campaign donors, gave him a major contribution. And what did President Obama do? Sign off on $500 million of loan guarantees of our money. What happened? The company went bankrupt. A few years later, laid off all its employees. President Obama still has his campaign contribution. The American taxpayer has a $500 million hole. I think it is fundamentally wrong, and I disagree with any kind of stimulus spending for any green energy companies.
Mr. Neumann, this is a question that really resonates with a lot of conservatives in America today. How do you feel about it?
I was actually looking through my list to see if I could put my finger on it out of the 150 items that we've already suggested for cutting. Folks, the key to this whole thing is there's a lot of things that need to be cut out of this government. I want to see us return to a free market system. I want the government out of the business of picking winners and losers. So when you talk about tax credits for green energies, I want to talk about tax credits and subsidies not only for green energies, which we need to get rid of. I want to return to a free market system with the government out of the way. So let's end the tax subsidies for green energies. But let's also end the tax subsidies for all kinds of other things where the government is in the business of picking winners and losers. Folks, it's got to stop. Would you like a few? Peanut subsidies, sugar subsidies, ethanol subsidies, which, by the way, I'm happy to say was stopped. My point to all of this, and you had the specific items that the last question asked about. You cannot pick out a specific thing and talk about it, folks. The problem is much deeper than that. Tax credits, let's get rid of them all so we can return to a free market system.
Mr. Smith, you have 30 seconds on this question as we close up before we get to closing statements. Go ahead, please.
Well, let's just take a look at windmills. That's been a hot topic in northern Wisconsin, northwestern Wisconsin, even northeastern Wisconsin here now. And when we're looking at the subsidies, we have to, like Mr. Hovde was talking about, they have to be able to stand alone. The free market will dictate whether this is a viable energy alternative or not. And at this point, it takes $5 million roughly to build one of the windmills. The shelf life is about 10 years. The amount of energy savings is about $20,000 per year. So do the math. That's $200,000 of energy savings for a $5 million windmill.
Need to hold you right there. I want to tell you, this went faster than Congress can spend your money. Okay, this was lightning round at its finest. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much tonight. Great debate, great conversation. Please, a round of applause for our candidates tonight. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the energy you brought to the debate. And again, I want to thank our panelists who really infused some lively questions and kept these gentlemen on their toes, I'd have to say. And I think that's what this is all about. We're going to begin with closing statements now. And because of the way we drew the lot with candidate Kip Smith ending his opening remarks, we're going to back that up, and you begin opening remarks, and you have 60 seconds, sir. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Matt, and it's been a real pleasure being here and being part of this panel. And I'll tell you, we've heard some really great questions about some incredibly serious issues, and we need serious individuals who are really ready to stand up and take care of these issues head on. That's why I'm here. I could be very, very happy staying in northern Wisconsin and hiding like Dillinger. But I can't do that because my country will die if I do. It's time for our citizens to take control of our government once again and to do what's right, not for re-election, but because it's right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And if I do the math right, and I'm a journalist, so I never do the math right, I want to turn our attention to candidate Hovde.
As we've talked about, our country's in trouble, serious trouble, and we have to change course, and we have to do it quickly and act now because we don't have a lot of time. We can't look to the past. We can't try to address these problems by looking to the past because so many of the problems we face today came over the last couple decades. We have to deal with reality, where we are now, and look to the future. You have to make a decision. Who is the person that has the economic background and the skills to go to Washington and make a change? I've spent 25 years in the private sector. I've built companies, turned companies around. I've spent my life in the financial markets where so many of our financial problems have emanated from. I believe I'm the person that can go there and bring the vitality, vigor, and energy, and the passion and the courage to make the tough choices. I'll be asking for your support. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, sir. Candidate Neumann, the floor is yours.
I'd like to close this evening with just a very brief story. When Sue and I made the decision, our family, to run for the United States Senate last year, there were discussions in other parts of our family, and one of my grandchildren was over a couple days after these discussions occurred, and my son asked my grandson, 3-year-old grandson Charlie, he said, "Why should Grandpa run for the United States Senate?" And my 3-year-old grandson looked up at me in a loud, strong voice, and he said to me, "Grandpa, tell him to quit spending my money." And I guess, folks, when I think about running for the United States Senate, that is what it's all about. I was recently in a room with Reed Ribble, our congressman from the Green Bay area, and he asked a very important question. He asked the question, how many people in this room honestly believe that we can turn America over to the next generation, to our children and our grandchildren, in better shape than we found it? And only one hand in the whole room went up, and that was mine. Because you see, I believe in America. I believe in you, the people, and I believe we can fix what's wrong in this country. I would like to fulfill a dream of mine, and that is that I could come back to this stage in 5 years. And when I ask that same question, how many people believe that we can turn America over to our children and grandchildren in better shape than we found it, I want to see every hand go up in the room, because we've ended Obamacare, we've balanced our budget, and we've restored our economy. Folks, this is the greatest nation in the world. It's the United States of America, and it's a tremendous privilege to live here.
I'm going to need to cut you off there, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And finally tonight, closing statements from candidate Fitzgerald.
Yeah, last week I spoke to a group, and a gentleman pulled me on the side after I was done speaking to him, and he said, you know what? I've been studying this U.S. Senate race, and I've looked at all the candidates, and I can't distinguish where you guys are on the issue. You're all about the same on the different issues. I think you're all conservatives. But he said, let me tell you why I'm going to support you. Because politicians can say anything on the campaign trail. But what you did over the course of the last year, you did what you said you would do. You didn't blink an eye, and you got this state back on the right track. That's why I'm going to support you for U.S. Senate. Because I'll tell you, it's not good enough anymore to just go out to Washington, vote no on everything, and say I'm a conservative. You have to look at people that will lead other people to conservative principles of less government, less spending, less taxation. That's what I'm good at. I have the ability to lead people to those principles like we did here in Wisconsin. And I want to go out to Washington, D.C. and do the same thing for you. God bless you.
Thank you,
God
sir.
bless America.
Please, another round of applause for our candidates tonight. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. And thank you, citizens, for your involvement tonight. It's so important. And at Wisconsin Reporter and at the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity, we'll leave you with this because it's the most important thing I believe that will be said here tonight. Vote. Get out and vote. You are responsible for your government. Wisconsin Reporter and the Republican Party of Waukesha County, thank you for coming out to this debate tonight. Thank you.